What's up, guys? It's your girl Stacy Cake, your host for What's Hot, and today I am here with multi-award winning news correspondent and author of Madness, Race and Insanity in the Jim Crow Asylum, Antonia Hylton. Madness is a book that talks about the 93-year-old history of Crownsville Hospital, originally known as Maryland's Hospital for the Negro Insane. The campus consists of various buildings and still stands in Anne Arundel County today, shuttered and covered in vines. So unfortunately, I did experience some technical difficulties during this interview. So the first question I'm going to read to you guys, and you're going to hear a little bit snippets from what I have from Antonia Hylton answering the question, and then I reached out to get a written statement from her just to fill in the pieces of some of what was missing. But the rest of the interview after the first question, you will hear it firsthand. So a recurring message that I picked up on was while reading Madness was that the insane and the sane weren't really that different, and a lot of their fears were valid. I asked, what does this say to the average person about mental illness?
In a written statement, Hylton answered, "Our understanding of mental illness is shaped by our history and our culture. The line between who gets categorized as sane or insane is often thin and the goalposts move. In my research and in the oral history I gathered from the community around the hospital, I found that race influenced diagnostic and treatment decisions. There were patients at Crownsville with legitimate health concerns, and then there were patients who were sent to the hospital for the crime of cutting off a white person in traffic, for daring to eat at a white-only restaurant, or for hanging out too late in Baltimore."
I really love that you brought up the thing about the line between the insane and sane, because it's something that I think has gone over some people's heads, and it's such an important thing. And I just think too much in our current day, people like to believe that they're like better than the people around them who are suffering. And we're not better than them. Most of us are like one life experience away from suffering. Neighbors, your colleagues, your friends, your cousins, and have a bit more grace, have a bit more patience for people around you, and think about the role that you could play in your own community in giving people more support. And, I think too often in this country, people kind of create these categories and other people, and they allow themselves to see themselves as the good people and other people as the bad people. And, historically what we see is when that's happened, people like us, we suffer. We're left without social supports. We're left without infrastructure. We're left without community. And it hurts everyone, but certainly the most marginalized are left behind the most. And so, I think when you see the thin line between all this, it kind of points you to, on the hopeful side, a way in which we could reframe these debates going forward.
Definitely. And I think this kind of leaks into the next question of like, what should Crownsville represent for locals today, like regardless of race? Because there were a lot of people impacted and the hospital did eventually become integrated.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing too that's important to know in this book is that, while you deal with the horror and the reality of the patients building this place from the ground up, and in many ways in those early years almost being enslaved by the white people who are controlling the institution, that over time, the heroes, the people who come in to save these patients, while the heart is really a Black community that comes in to save their own loved ones and neighbors, there are also amazing people of all backgrounds, including Jewish doctors who, escaped the Holocaust, who come to this institution and believe in reform and see the humanity in the patients and try to do their best every single day. And so there is always that complexity. It's not this one-note story. And so when you look now to the future, I think that with all the hundreds of acres and the buildings that have been left behind, what we're seeing right now is a community coming together in Maryland and debating, okay, well, how can this represent true healing for all of us? How can this be something that feels accessible and truly comfortable and welcoming to children all the way up to the elderly? And so the ideas that have been thrown out have included community gardens, a horse therapy farm for young children, housing for veterans, bike paths and gardens so people can just come and sit and relax, small museums so that people can come and learn this history and really understand their own county and community better. And I think what we're likely to see is some combination of all of those things. Like all this big plot of land is going to become a really rich community center. At least that's what the residents are demanding of the leadership there. And so I think now, if you live in the Annapolis, Anne Arundel area, the real question is, how do you hold your leadership accountable to make sure that what's about to come truly represents you, truly benefits you, and is truly accessible to you and to your kids? That is the next stage of this fight now. But that's in your hands in a way. I feel like I'm the journalist. I did the work to tell you what's happened the last 100 years and how did we get to this moment. But now the rest of the story is up to you, and you have to kind of make those phone calls, send your emails to the county executive, show up to public meetings. They've been hosting public meetings where they want to hear your feedback, and go, because that is really the only way to ensure that this is a place that's going to truly be centered on community and healing.
And you mentioned that a lot of ideas were proposed on ways to unify the community and give more healing. So were these ideas proposed by a diverse community, or did you find it was predominantly minorities?
It's definitely a diverse community that's at the table right now. But I will say that the county has been making efforts to reach out to people, many of whom are in my book, who are leaders in the Black community there, or are elders who were patients or employees who really understand the land and understand the gravity of what happened there. And they are working to kind of center their experiences in this, because the county, I think they understand, this is a valuable property. We can't turn this into something like a lacrosse stadium or a theme park and a haunted house. They don't want to disrespect the reality of what this land represents and how this land is so sacred to the Black community in particular. And so I think you're going to see kind of everyone at the table, but they're making these efforts to get sort of an additional layer of perspective and input from the Black community, certainly.
Gotcha. And it kind of stood out to me that you spoke with elected officials and were able to include them in your book, including County Executive Stuart Pittman and Governor Westmore. And what does their support represent, if anything, for not only the legacy of Crownsville, but the perception of the Black community by the government?
Well, I think that it represents a unique moment, a kind of first time in history in Maryland where you have a governor and a county executive who are really on the same page about what this place should become. I mean, Governor Moore being the first Black governor in Maryland, Stuart Pittman being someone who has been very interested in the history of this hospital for years now, and the two of them really being ready to collaborate in a way that county executives and governors haven't always been when it comes to this topic. And so I think it represents turning a new leaf. I think it represents collaboration, but also, that there is an urgency there, because you don't know who's coming into office after them. You don't know if they will have the same idea, the same commitment, the same care for the people who have come forward and expressed interest in this history. And so that's part of why I think you see so many people reaching out and attending these meetings, because I think in a way they know the clock is ticking, that if they want to wake up 3, 5, 7 years from now and see a community space that they really do love, that they have to put the work in. And so, I think that the two of them, they represent this new moment and this, I also think the other piece too, right, is there are all these debates going on around our country, and Americans can't seem to agree about American history right now. There's a movement to ban books, to talk less about the history of racism and discrimination and hurt. But what you see in these two leaders is actually that they're on the same page, and that they are interested in and willing to face Maryland's history. And the question now is, does that continue? Does there continue to be support for that? Do people speak up for it and really, put the resources, the money where their mouth is? That's the question now.
Yeah, because funding definitely played a big part in the wellness of the patients that were discussed in the book, and I'm sure more that we don't even know about.
Oh yeah.
So it was a lot of topics and themes in the book, as I mentioned previously, but if you had to pick um, a message for Marylanders and locals, the most important message for them to take away, what would you say that was?
Ooh, it's tough to pick because there's a few. Um, I think the major message for me is there are a lot of people in our country, in our world, who want us to believe that there is very little we can do to solve the mental health crisis, that we can all kind of throw our hands up and tell ourselves it's not our problem and just accept there's always going to be a lot of people who are without homes, a lot of people who are struggling with drug addiction, a lot of people who are suffering, that we're going to have to see gun violence in public all the time. They kind of want us to just accept it, I think. But one of the discoveries that I made in this book is that a lot of the things that save people who experience mental health crises, it's not a fancy medication, although certainly medication helps and really can save lives. It's not a brand new technology that's arrived, sometime in the last 20, 30, 50 years. Really, what seems to make the difference for patients is whether or not they have a community to come home to, a real community to come home to, a community with clinics and social supports and doctors who love them and look like them and believe in them, whether they have relatives who will support them, wrap their arms around them, have their back, forgive them when they make mistakes. Those things are often the difference between life or death, between success and failure, between rehabilitation and recidivism. And so, when people try to tell you that this is not something we need to worry about, that those of us who are healthy can kind of turn a blind eye, that just know that the research, the data, and the researchers, the people who spend time with patients, who are doing therapy with them, who are treating them as psychiatrists, they're kind of screaming from the rooftops, and they're pointing towards some things that are not rocket science, that we could all do and fund and support tomorrow if we wanted a better, community. Those things are strong schools, parks, libraries, violence reduction efforts, small acts like making sure that children in your life, whether that's your own kids, your niece, your nephew, your siblings, that they trust you, and that if they ever really struggled, they know they can come to you, and that you'd be somebody who would help them out and not judge them. And, when you think about that, when you see those lists of things, we could all wake up tomorrow and do a little bit more of them right away. We could start working with people in our neighborhoods, even people who have other disagreements with us. Because the truth is, the system isn't serving most people right now, white, black, wealthy, poor. A lot of people are on long waiting lists to get access to mental health services. I'm here in New York, where people are routinely stuck on long waiting lists to even just see a good therapist or doctor, even if they have great insurance. And the truth is, according to the experts, it doesn't have to be this way. And so we could, create a national dialogue. We could come up with solutions. And we don't have to throw our hands up and just accept things the way they are.
And I think for everyone watching, the story of Sonia King definitely exemplified what you said about how community can really be the difference maker in how someone moves forward from trauma, mental illness, or negative experiences. And she was a story that really stood out to me, just because of that, because she actually did, she's one of the patients that we know actually experienced real trauma, and you could empathize with her struggle with mental wellness after that.
Absolutely. And I really was so blown away and grateful to Reverend Sonia King for speaking with me. She is still alive, living in Odenton in Maryland, and her story is so inspirational. She came to the hospital as just a young person in college, in a really low place, feeling unworthy, feeling rejection, feeling, just a complete lack of self-worth. And she is, of course, put on medication and gets that kind of she gets that kind of medical support that we typically think of as happening in a hospital. But really what makes all the difference is that there's all these Black women in the hospital who love her, who take her on walks, who remind her every day, this isn't the end of your story. You are worthy. You're going to go home. This is just a moment in time. It doesn't really say anything about who you are or what you're worth. And, when you see that and you see how much it helped Sonia and how much the messages those women sent her, they've stayed with her whole life. Decades later, she still thinks about those things that the women said to her before she went to bed, or the conversations they had on walks, right? That you realize that's often the difference. And there are too few people who have a whole network around them that really has their back and is reminding them that they're special, that they're worthy, that they're loved, and that they have a whole life ahead of them.
And you can really see how that makes a difference for like generations ahead, like generations to come, and like how she's helping people now. And so kind of in that vicinity, like how can Black people not only better navigate the mental health care system, but the justice system as we try and undo like generations of trauma and harm?
Well, one of the first things that experts tell me helps is, encouraging dialogue in your own families, changing some of your family culture. Like my family has changed ours. We used to not talk about mental health. We used to not talk about emotions. And now my family has made a huge 180. Most of us are in therapy, and we talk about our feelings all the time. During the pandemic, we would get on Zoom and try to strategize and support each other. And we all really work together to stabilize a loved one who was in the midst of a mental health crisis, something that I wrote about a little bit in the book. And so changing your culture, changing your habits just in your own family is a really great place to start. And no one has to give you permission to do that. You can call your loved ones up and start doing it right now. And then I think the other piece is looking at the policy ideas of the local leaders in Maryland around you, and seeing, who supports actual community programs, who wants to write up bills and fund things that will help children grow up in safe communities and have fun and free spaces without too much surveillance. A lot of the research shows that our young generations coming out of the pandemic, they're really struggling. They feel a lot of loneliness. They don't feel welcome in a lot of public spaces. Well, what can we do about that? Who's actually talking about that? Who cares? Who doesn't care? And start making decisions based around those things. And then I think, Black communities can, in particular, like we can use our schools, our churches, our programs, our sororities and fraternities. We have such a rich history of gathering and of creating our own movements, our own, momentum. So I think we can lean on those spaces to start the conversation. And that's where our power lies. So long as people feel a lot of stigma, a lot of shame, and a lot of embarrassment, and then they don't want to talk about these things, it's very hard to come up with solutions and to find a constituency, to find people to collaborate with if you're not even ready to kind of talk about it yourself, And that's one of, I think, the worst things about all the stigma associated with mental illness, is that the truth is almost everyone has a touch point for the mental health crisis. Almost everyone knows someone who's suffered or had a substance abuse challenge, or who's experienced grief and extreme loneliness and depression. And so if we talked about it more, I think we realized we had a lot more people who had our back, who shared our same ideas. But you kind of do have to take that leap of faith first.
Definitely. And I think when you were talking about changing the culture at home, it really brought back that phrase that a lot of people say when they talk about students and stuff, about how it starts at home. A lot of things start at home. So I think that's a good reiteration of kind of that message. And it's the little things that we can do that can make like all of the difference down the line as we tackle some of the heaviest topics in our culture and just like in our neighborhoods. And could you just let everyone know the best place they can find Madness, purchase your book, or even learn more about the book?
Absolutely. Madness is available everywhere books are sold. In Maryland, I encourage you to support indie booksellers, places like Mahogany Books, Park Books, Maryland. They are amazing booksellers. They have Madness on the shelves. Some of them have even signed copies if you're interested. But if you're unable to, or you don't have access to a local store, you can get the book online at places like Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, bookshop.org. I'll be back in town on April 27th for a ceremony called Say My Name on the hospital's grounds. It's open to the public. I'll be there at 10 a.m. at Crownsville. And so if you have a book you want signed, or you have questions about this history, or you want to meet some of the people who are in the book, that is going to be an amazing event. April 27th, 10 a.m. at Crownsville Hospital. Anyone who's available should come.
Oh, that's awesome. I think I will definitely meet you there.
Please.
Thank you so much again for your time. Everyone, this was Antonia Hylton. Make sure you check out her book.
Thanks for having me.